The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the small park nestled in the heart of the city. Birds chirped cheerfully, and the gentle rustle of leaves provided a soothing soundtrack to the peaceful morning. On a weathered wooden bench near the fountain sat an elderly man named Elijah Thompson. His dark skin bore the marks of time, wrinkles etched deeply into his kind face. He wore a simple gray sweater and trousers, his polished shoes hinting at the pride he took in his appearance. In one hand, he held a walking cane, in the other, a small book with worn pages. Elijah wasn't reading today, though. Instead, he gazed out at the tranquil scene before him, savoring the stillness that came with early mornings. Few people were around, just a jogger here, a dog walker there. It was moments like these that Elijah cherished most. After decades of hard work as a judge, retirement had given him the gift of slowing down, of appreciating life's quiet joys. But little did he know, this serene morning would soon take a turn he could never have anticipated. Not far away, 2 police officers were patrolling the area. Officer Mark and Officer Ryan were relatively new to the force, eager but inexperienced. Their uniforms were crisp, their badges gleaming under the sunlight. As they walked, they scanned the park for anything, or anyone, that might seem out of place. That's when their eyes landed on Elijah. At first glance, all they saw was an old black man sitting alone on a bench. To them, his presence seemed unusual, even suspicious. Why was he here so early? What was he doing? These questions swirled in their minds, fueled by preconceived notions rather than facts. Without hesitation, they decided to approach him. As they drew closer, Elijah noticed their approach but didn't react immediately. He simply watched them, his expression calm and unreadable. When the officers reached him, they stopped abruptly, towering over him with crossed arms. "What are you doing here?" Officer Mark barked, his tone sharp and accusatory. Elijah blinked slowly, unfazed by the sudden intrusion. "I'm sitting," he replied softly, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. Officer Ryan sneered, clearly unimpressed by the simplicity of the answer. "Sitting? You can't just sit here, this is public property." Elijah raised an eyebrow slightly, his patience unwavering. "Last I checked, benches exist for sitting," he said, his tone polite yet firm. The officers exchanged glances, irritation flickering across their faces. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like him. Their frustration grew as Elijah continued to remain composed, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. Sensing their discomfort, he added gently, "If I've done something wrong, please tell me. Otherwise, I'd appreciate some peace." But instead of backing off, the officers doubled down, their behavior growing increasingly hostile. Little did they know, their actions were about to set off a chain reaction that would change everything. For them, for Elijah, and for the entire community. The tension between Elijah and the 2 officers thickened with each passing second. Officer Mark, clearly annoyed by Elijah's calm demeanor, stepped closer, his boots crunching against the gravel beneath him. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he snapped, his voice dripping with disdain. Elijah didn't flinch. He simply looked up at the officer, his dark eyes steady and unwavering. "I'm not trying to be clever," he replied softly. "I'm just trying to enjoy my morning." Officer Ryan, who had been standing silently until now, chimed in with a mocking laugh. "Enjoy your morning, sitting here like you own the place." He gestured toward the empty bench as if it were some sort of crime scene. Elijah tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. "This is a public park," he said evenly. "Everyone owns this place." His quiet confidence only seemed to infuriate the officers further. Officer Mark leaned down, getting uncomfortably close to Elijah's face. "We'll decide what happens here," he growled, his breath hot and uneven. Elijah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the young man before him, noting the anger simmering behind his narrowed eyes. It was obvious that these officers weren't interested in answers. They were looking for excuses. Sensing an opportunity to assert dominance, Officer Ryan reached into his patrol car and grabbed a half-full water bottle from the dashboard. "You want to sit here so badly?" he sneered, twisting off the cap. Before Elijah could react, the officer poured the cold water directly onto his head. The liquid splashed across Elijah's gray sweater, soaking through to his skin. For a moment, everything went silent. The chirping birds, the distant chatter of joggers, even the rustling leaves seemed to pause. Elijah sat motionless, water dripping from his hair and sliding down his cheeks. His cane rested firmly in his hand, but he made no move to wipe away the droplets or stand up. Instead, he stared at the officers, his gaze piercing yet oddly compassionate. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger, only a deep sadness that seemed to weigh heavily on him. "Feel better now?" Elijah asked quietly, breaking the silence. His voice carried no hint of sarcasm or bitterness. It was almost as if he pitied them. The question caught both officers off guard. They exchanged uneasy glances, their bravado faltering for a split second, but they quickly masked their discomfort with forced laughter, pretending the act hadn't shaken them at all. "Next time, maybe you'll think twice about where you decide to enjoy your morning," Officer Mark muttered, straightening up and taking a step back. Officer Ryan tossed the empty bottle into the car, slamming the door shut with unnecessary force. Together they turned and walked away, leaving Elijah sitting alone on the wet bench. As they disappeared around the corner, Elijah sighed deeply, shaking his head almost imperceptibly. He knew exactly what had just happened, not because of who he was, but because of how others saw him. To those officers, he wasn't a human being deserving of respect. He was merely a stereotype, someone they felt entitled to belittle without consequence. And while the cold water soaked his clothes, it couldn't dampen the quiet strength that radiated from within him. Unbeknownst to Elijah, however, this encounter wasn't going unnoticed. Nearby, a young woman jogging along the path slowed her pace, her eyes wide with shock as she watched the entire scene unfold. She hesitated for a moment, torn between stepping in and staying safe. Finally, she pulled out her phone and began recording, her hands trembling slightly as she captured every detail. Little did anyone know, this single act would ignite a firestorm that would spread far beyond the confines of the park and bring justice crashing down in ways no one could have predicted. The young woman stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding as she watched the two officers strut away with smug expressions. Her name was Sarah, and she had been jogging through the park to clear her mind before heading to her internship at a local news station. But now her thoughts were anything but clear. She glanced down at her phone, where the video recording icon blinked steadily on the screen. What she had just witnessed wasn't just wrong. It was cruel, unjust, and completely unacceptable. Sarah hesitated, her fingers hovering over the stop button. Part of her wanted to delete the footage immediately. After all, posting it online could lead to trouble. The police department might retaliate, or worse, the officers could track her down. But another part of her, a stronger, more determined part, knew she couldn't stay silent. This wasn't just about one man being humiliated. It was about something much bigger. It was about speaking up when no one else would. Taking a deep breath, Sarah lowered her phone and approached Elijah cautiously. "Sir?" she called out softly, not wanting to startle him. Elijah turned his head slightly, his soaked sweater clinging to his frame. His expression remained calm, though there was a faint weariness in his eyes. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, stepping closer. She noticed how dignified he looked, even in such an undignified situation. Elijah gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine, young lady," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Thank you for asking." Sarah nodded, clutching her phone tightly behind her back. Do you need help? Should I call someone?" she offered, glancing toward the direction the officers had gone. Elijah shook his head slowly. "No need," he replied. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened, and it won't be the last." His words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. How could he sound so composed after what he'd just endured? She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but found herself at a loss for words. Instead, she pulled a towel from her gym bag and handed it to him. "Here," she said quietly. "It's not much, but it might help." Elijah accepted the towel with a nod of gratitude. "You're very kind," he said, dabbing at his face and hair. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "You filmed that, didn't you?" His tone wasn't accusatory, just matter of fact. Sarah blinked in surprise, caught off guard by his perceptiveness. "Yes," she admitted, her cheeks flushing slightly. I thought maybe people should see what happened." Elijah studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. Finally, he spoke. "That's your choice to make," he said simply. "But remember, justice doesn't always come from anger. Sometimes it comes from understanding." Sarah frowned, trying to process his words. Before she could respond, Elijah continued, "If you choose to share it, don't let hate guide you. Let it remind people that we're better than this." With that, he stood up slowly, using his cane for support. He folded the damp towel neatly and handed it back to Sarah. "Thank you again," he said, offering her another small smile before turning to walk away. Sarah watched him go, her mind racing. Who was this man? How could he remain so calm after everything? As Elijah disappeared down the path, Sarah looked down at her phone. The video was still saved, waiting to be shared or deleted. She knew what she had to do. Taking a deep breath, she opened her social media app and typed a short caption. "This happened today in the park. We can't stay silent anymore." With trembling hands, she uploaded the clip, tagging local activist groups and news outlets. Within minutes, notifications began flooding her phone. People were sharing the post, commenting in outrage, demanding answers. Strangers sent messages thanking her for speaking up, while others urged her to stay safe. Sarah felt a mix of emotions: fear, pride, uncertainty, but also a growing sense of hope. Maybe this video wouldn't change everything overnight, but it was a start. And as she scrolled through the comments, one phrase kept appearing again and again: "Who is this man?" Little did anyone know, the answer to that question would turn this incident into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. By the time Sarah finished uploading the video, it was already gaining traction. The clip spread like wildfire, shared across social media platforms by people who were outraged, heartbroken, and determined to demand justice. Within hours, hashtags like "Justice for Elijah" and "Gun Stand with Elijah" began trending nationwide. News outlets picked up the story, airing segments that highlighted the shocking footage of the officer's cruelty. Viewers couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disbelief as they watched the elderly man sit quietly, his dignity intact despite the humiliation he endured. What struck many viewers most was Elijah's calm demeanor. In a world where injustice often sparks outrage or despair, his quiet strength stood out. People wanted to know more about him: his name, his background, his story. Journalists scrambled to uncover details, digging into public records and reaching out to community members for information. Social media became a hub of speculation, with users piecing together clues from the video. Some noticed the way Elijah spoke, not just politely, but with a wisdom that hinted at a life rich with experience. Others pointed out how he carried himself, his posture straight and proud even in the face of hostility. It didn't take long for the truth to emerge. A local historian recognized Elijah from the video and reached out to reporters. "That's Judge Elijah Thompson," he explained during an interview. "He served on the bench for over 3 decades, presiding over some of the most important civil rights cases in our state's history." The revelation sent shockwaves through the online community. Comment sections exploded with reactions. "Wait, this man is a retired judge? They did that to a former judge?" As more details surfaced, the full scope of Elijah's legacy came into focus. He had been known for his fairness, earning respect from both sides of the courtroom. During his tenure, he had championed reforms to address systemic inequalities, working tirelessly to ensure equal treatment under the law. After retiring, he chose to live a humble life, dedicating his time to mentoring young people and volunteering in underserved communities. To those who knew him, Elijah wasn't just a respected figure. He was a beacon of hope, someone who embodied integrity and compassion. The contrast between Elijah's esteemed reputation and the officer's behavior made the incident even more jarring. How could two individuals sworn to protect and serve treat a decorated public servant with such blatant disrespect? The question fueled widespread calls for accountability. Petitions demanding disciplinary action against the officers garnered thousands of signatures overnight. Protesters gathered outside the police precinct, holding signs that read, "Respect our elders," and "Justice starts here." Local leaders joined the outcry, urging the department to investigate thoroughly and transparently. Meanwhile, Elijah remained largely silent. Despite the growing attention, he avoided interviews and declined requests to speak publicly. Those close to him said he preferred to let the moment unfold without inserting himself into the chaos. This decision only added to his mystique, drawing admiration from supporters who saw his restraint as yet another example of his grace under pressure. But while Elijah stayed out of the spotlight, others stepped forward to amplify his voice. Community activists organized rallies, using the incident to shed light on broader issues of racial profiling and police misconduct. Teachers incorporated the story into their lessons, encouraging students to reflect on themes of empathy and justice. Even celebrities weighed in, sharing the video and calling for systemic change. As the days passed, the momentum showed no signs of slowing. What started as a single act of cruelty had ignited a movement, one rooted not in vengeance, but in the belief that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. And though Elijah hadn't sought the attention, there was no denying that his presence had sparked something powerful. The nation was watching, waiting to see what would happen next, and whether true accountability would follow. The revelation about Elijah's identity sent shockwaves through the police department. Officers whispered nervously in hallways, and supervisors scrambled to contain the growing scandal. The pressure from the public was relentless. Calls for justice echoed across social media, news outlets, and protests outside the precinct. Faced with mounting outrage, the police chief held an emergency press conference, promising a swift and thorough investigation. But behind closed doors, panic set in. Everyone knew this wasn't just any case. It involved a retired judge, a man who had spent decades ensuring fairness in the very system now under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Elijah remained calm and composed, as if untouched by the storm swirling around him. He continued his daily routine, visiting the park where he often sat, mentoring young students at a local community center, and tending to his small garden. To those who didn't know him, it seemed almost surreal that someone at the center of such a high-profile controversy could remain so unfazed. Yet those closest to Elijah understood his perspective. "He doesn't seek revenge," a longtime friend explained during an interview. "Elijah believes in the power of truth and the possibility of change." But while Elijah stayed grounded, others were determined to ensure accountability. Activists pushed for Elijah to testify before a special tribunal convened to address police misconduct, a rare move typically reserved for cases of extreme importance. At first, Elijah hesitated. He didn't want to be seen as seeking vengeance or stirring division. However, after much thought and encouragement from friends and family, he agreed to participate, not for himself, but for the greater good. "If my story can help prevent this from happening to someone else," he told them quietly, "then it's worth it." What no one expected, not even Elijah, was how fate would intervene. When the tribunal members were announced, Elijah's name appeared among them. Due to his esteemed reputation and unparalleled understanding of the law, he had been selected as a guest adjudicator to oversee the disciplinary hearing. The irony was impossible to ignore. The two officers who had humiliated him would now have to face him directly, sitting across the table as their actions were scrutinized. News of Elijah's role spread quickly, sparking both awe and disbelief. Social media lit up with comments like, "Karma really does exist," and "This is straight out of a movie." For many, it felt like poetic justice, a chance for Elijah to confront those who had disrespected him, not with anger or bitterness, but with the same wisdom and fairness he had demonstrated throughout his career. As the hearing approached, anticipation reached a fever pitch. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Truth and justice prevail," and "Accountability starts now." Inside, reporters packed the room, eager to document every moment. The atmosphere was tense, charged with emotion. When Elijah entered, walking slowly with his cane, the room fell silent. Heads turned, eyes wide with respect and curiosity. Despite his age, there was an undeniable presence about him, a quiet authority that commanded attention. Officer Mark and Officer Ryan arrived shortly after, their usual swagger replaced by visible unease. As they took their seats, they glanced toward Elijah, their expressions a mix of disbelief and dread. They hadn't recognized him during their encounter in the park, blinded by prejudice and arrogance. Now, faced with the reality of who he was, they squirmed uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. It was clear they hadn't anticipated this outcome when they poured water on his head that fateful morning. For Elijah, the situation was bittersweet. He wasn't here to gloat or exact revenge. He genuinely wanted to see growth and understanding. As the hearing began, he listened intently, his gaze steady and impartial. His role wasn't personal, it was professional. But as the officers stumbled over their explanations and struggled to justify their behavior, it became evident that their actions spoke louder than their words ever could. And for the first time, they were forced to confront the weight of what they had done, not just to Elijah, but to the ideals of justice and humanity itself. The tribunal room buzzed with tension as the hearing unfolded. Every word spoken seemed to hang heavy in the air, amplified by the significance of the moment. Officer Mark and Officer Ryan sat rigidly in their chairs, their usual confidence replaced by a mix of fear and defensiveness. They fidgeted nervously, glancing at Elijah sporadically but quickly averting their eyes whenever his calm gaze met theirs. It was clear they hadn't expected to face him again, let alone in a setting where he held power over their fate. Elijah, for his part, remained composed throughout the proceedings. His demeanor was neither harsh nor vengeful. Instead, he exuded quiet authority, listening intently to every detail presented. When it came time for him to speak, the room fell silent, all eyes fixed on him. He began slowly, choosing his words, carefully. "I've spent my life striving to uphold justice," he said, his voice steady and measured. "But justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about understanding why mistakes happen and ensuring they don't happen again." He turned his attention to the officers, who shifted uncomfortably under his piercing gaze. "You, too, acted out of ignorance and bias," he continued. "And while your actions caused harm, I believe you are capable of learning from this experience." The sincerity in his tone caught everyone off guard. Here was a man who had every right to be angry, yet he chose compassion over condemnation. For a brief moment, even the officers looked up, surprise flickering across their faces. As the hearing progressed, evidence mounted against them. Testimonies from witnesses, including Sarah, whose video had sparked the movement, and internal reports confirmed that their behavior violated department policies and ethical standards. The tribunal panel, guided by Elijah's input, deliberated thoroughly before delivering their verdict. Both officers would be permanently dismissed from the force. Additionally, they were required to undergo mandatory sensitivity training and community service, working directly with marginalized groups to better understand the impact of prejudice. The decision sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Protesters outside erupted into cheers when the news broke, chanting Elijah's name and celebrating what many saw as a victory for accountability. Reporters rushed to capture reactions, while social media exploded with messages of gratitude for Elijah's role in the outcome. Yet despite the public acclaim, Elijah remained humble. In a brief statement following the hearing, he emphasized the importance of moving forward constructively. "This isn't about punishment," he said. "It's about growth for these officers, for our institutions, and for ourselves." The fallout from the tribunal extended far beyond the two officers. Facing immense pressure, the police department announced sweeping reforms aimed at addressing systemic issues within its ranks. New training programs focused on anti-racism and empathy were implemented, along with stricter oversight measures to prevent future incidents. Community leaders praised these steps, though they stressed that real change would take time and sustained effort. For Elijah, the hearing marked the end of his involvement in the case. Having fulfilled his duty, he returned to his quiet life, resuming his routines with the same grace and humility that defined him. But his presence lingered in the hearts and minds of those inspired by his example. Students at the community center, where he volunteered, peppered him with questions, eager to learn how he maintained such composure. "It's not about me," he told them gently. "It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." As weeks passed, the nation continued to reflect on the incident and its aftermath. Conversations about racial profiling, police accountability, and systemic inequality gained renewed urgency, fueled by Elijah's story. What started as a single act of cruelty had transformed into a catalyst for meaningful dialogue and action. And though Elijah never sought recognition, there was no denying the profound impact he had made, not through anger or vengeance, but through unwavering dignity and faith in humanity's potential to change. The weeks following the tribunal brought a wave of change that rippled through the city and beyond. The dismissal of Officer Mark and Officer Ryan marked the beginning of a broader reckoning within the police department. Their case became a cautionary tale, discussed in training sessions and internal meetings as an example of how prejudice and unchecked power could lead to devastating consequences. Photographs of the two officers were included in presentations alongside Elijah's story, serving as a stark reminder of accountability. For many within the force, it was a wake-up call, a moment to reflect on their own biases and actions. For Mark and Ryan, however, life took a sharp turn into obscurity. Stripped of their badges and uniforms, they found themselves adrift in a world that no longer trusted them. Job applications went unanswered, and former colleagues avoided them, embarrassed by association. The weight of public shame pressed down heavily, isolating them from the community they once claimed to serve. They tried to disappear, moving to different neighborhoods and avoiding social media, but whispers followed them wherever they went. Friends stopped calling. Family members distanced themselves, and even strangers recognized them from news headlines or viral videos. Their mandatory sensitivity training proved equally challenging. Tasked with working directly in underserved communities, they were forced to confront the realities of systemic inequality, realities they had previously ignored or dismissed. At first, they approached these assignments with reluctance, their body language stiff and defensive. But over time, something shifted. Conversations with residents who shared stories of discrimination and hardship began to chip away at their hardened exteriors. One particularly poignant interaction involved a young boy named Marcus, whose father had been wrongfully arrested years earlier. As Marcus recounted his struggles growing up without a parent, tears welled up in Ryan's eyes, a rare crack in his stoic facade. It wasn't just the community work that changed them. It was also the constant reminder of Elijah himself. Every session ended with a brief reflection on his words during the tribunal. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about understanding why mistakes happen and ensuring they don't happen again. Those words echoed in their minds long after the hearings concluded, forcing them to grapple with their own failures. Slowly, painfully, they started to see the humanity in others, the very thing they had denied Elijah that fateful morning in the park. While the officers worked to rebuild fragments of their lives, Elijah continued to inspire those around him. His name became synonymous with resilience and grace, and invitations poured in for him to speak at events across the country. Though he declined most of them, preferring to stay rooted in his community, he did agree to one televised interview. Sitting across from a well-known journalist, Elijah spoke candidly about the incident and its aftermath. "What happened to me wasn't unique," he said thoughtfully. "It happens every day to countless people who don't have a platform or a voice. My hope is that this moment will encourage us all to listen more closely, to each other, to our neighbors, and to those we might otherwise overlook. His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations in homes, classrooms, and workplaces nationwide. Schools incorporated his story into lessons on empathy and justice, while organizations used it as a blueprint for fostering inclusivity. Even celebrities joined the movement, sharing personal stories of overcoming adversity and urging fans to stand against injustice. As for Sarah, the young woman who filmed the video, she became an unexpected hero in her own right. Her courage to step forward inspired others to document instances of misconduct, creating a network of accountability powered by ordinary citizens. She received awards for her bravery, though she insisted the real credit belonged to Elijah. "I just pressed record," she said humbly during an acceptance speech. "He's the one who showed us what true strength looks like." In the end, the ripple effects of that single act of cruelty extended far beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a humiliating encounter between an elderly man and two misguided officers evolved into a national reckoning, a testament to the enduring power of dignity, compassion, and the belief that even in moments of darkness, there is always room for light. Months passed and the city began to feel different. The reforms implemented by the police department weren't perfect, but they marked a step in the right direction. Officers now attended regular workshops on cultural sensitivity, empathy, and de-escalation techniques. Community members were invited to participate in town hall meetings with law enforcement, fostering dialogue and building trust where there had once been division. Slowly, painfully, bridges were being rebuilt. And at the center of it all stood Elijah, quietly, humbly, reminding everyone that progress wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. Elijah returned to his simple life, finding joy in the little things, tending to his garden, mentoring young people, and taking long walks through the park. But he was no longer just an ordinary man in the eyes of many. To some, he was a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the power of grace under pressure. Strangers approached him during his walks, thanking him for what he had done. Some shared their own stories of injustice, while others simply wanted to shake his hand or offer a kind word. Elijah listened patiently to each person, offering encouragement and wisdom without ever seeking the spotlight. One day, as he sat on the same bench where the incident had occurred, a familiar face appeared before him. It was Sarah, the young woman who had filmed the video. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should interrupt his peaceful solitude, but Elijah noticed her immediately and waved her over with a warm smile. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle. "It's good to see you again." She sat beside him, clutching a notebook filled with questions for an article she was writing about grassroots activism. "I never got the chance to properly thank you," she admitted. "Your story changed so much. For me, for the community, for the country." Elijah chuckled softly, shaking his head. "It wasn't my story," he replied. "It was ours. People like you. You're the ones who made the difference. I was just sitting on a bench." Sarah smiled, though tears welled up in her eyes. "Still," she said, "you taught us how to respond with dignity instead of anger. That's something I'll carry with me forever." Elijah nodded thoughtfully, gazing out at the park. "Anger has its place," he said after a pause. "But it can't be the only thing guiding us. If we want real change, we have to lead with understanding, even when it's hard." As the seasons shifted, Elijah continued to inspire those around him in subtle yet profound ways. He visited schools, sharing his experiences with students and encouraging them to stand up for what was right. "You don't need a title or a platform to make a difference," he told them. "Sometimes all it takes is choosing kindness over cruelty, fairness over bias." His words stuck with the young listeners, planting seeds of hope and determination in their hearts. Meanwhile, the officers who had wronged him faded further into obscurity. Their names became footnotes in a larger narrative about justice and accountability. Though they struggled to find redemption, their story served as a reminder that actions have consequences, and that even those who stray can learn to do better. Occasionally, one of them would catch glimpses of Elijah on television, or hear his name mentioned in conversations. Each time they felt a pang of regret mixed with admiration for the man they had underestimated. In the end, Elijah's legacy wasn't defined by the cruelty he endured, but by the way he responded to it. He showed the world that true strength lies not in retaliation but in rising above hatred with unwavering dignity. His quiet courage sparked a movement that reached far beyond the confines of the park bench, touching lives and inspiring change in ways no one could have predicted. And so, the story came full circle, not with vengeance, but with growth, not with bitterness, but with hope. As Elijah walked home one evening, the golden light of sunset casting long shadows behind him, he paused to glance back at the park. For a moment, he allowed himself a small, contented smile. Justice hadn't come, quickly or easily, but it had come, and that he knew was worth every step of the journey.